Good evening, Baranana. It's actually a little after morning on June 27th, 2021. This is my second effort to address you formally and directly. Um, there's some news today. It seems to be indicating something that I understood you and your colleagues were otherwise also associated with, especially in the context of the area wherein we met. So I feel like it's only appropriate for me to give you a little bit of a background so you understand maybe a little bit of the context that's going on here for you to consider. I come from a family of people in technology. My understanding is my father specifically was very instrumental in developing IT matters, specifically connected to what is now identified as GPS and the manners in which GPS technologies are used for a variety of different applications. As a matter of fact, on what would have been my father's 62nd birthday, I came up with a plan regarding a specific kind of cell phone technology that I hoped would be able to track and moderate the production of electromagnetic frequency and could be combined with a systematology I developed in September 2017, which I consider to be a form of nascent biodefense. At that time, however, there was sabotage inherent in what I was able to access, despite coming from a family background that has substantial security, not only clearance, but also experience developing security matters related to the tech sector. And as I understand, that my father was actually a part of programming connected to a very notable company that has to deal with automation technologies, including industrial automation technologies. I've been in this situation where, because of political circumstances, I've not been able to get an accurate identification of kinds of processes that I would otherwise be able to engage. As a matter of fact, in September 2016, I signed up to take an online training for a mobile app development class that I understood very shortly after attempting to attend was not only engaged in bad faith, but was engaged in acts of overt sabotage. I've been tracking it ever since. I contacted people to let them know that the contract was not only unconstitutional, but blatantly illegal and attempting to obligate people to terms of service that were completely unacceptable. My understanding, as soon as I read that contract, which by the way, I took more than 7 pages, solid pages of notes on what was wrong with the contract, what was wrong, what was illegal, what was unacceptable about the contract. And before I did anything with the contract, I let the company that provided it know that there were serious flaws with the contract and that if things were to escalate to anything that could present a national security matter, that they would be held accountable. Nonetheless, they have persisted in some sort of alleged non-disclose and non-compete agreement that they intended to hold me to for 5 years. A 5 year term on that would expire in the middle of September of 2021. I understand that people in their network actually are working with serious international security threats and that they believe that they have people that are actually in government or affiliated with the government that are providing them with the cover. And thus far, they seem to have been successful in assuring that whoever it is that they have that has actually been able to infiltrate the government has been successful enough to prevent there actually being a redress. But their time is coming to a close, even by their own terms, and even if they were to try to make some sort of remonstration that anything they've done has been legitimate, they've refused to follow up and they've engaged in what can only be called cyber stalking, which is going to compromise whatever they intend to do once that contract terminates in September anyhow. But I bring this up because I understand that there was a lot that was going on in the time frame we met. There were other people who may have been concerned, and I think one of the major areas for consideration now is having to do with digital currencies and these transitions that have been happening with the digital currencies. In addition to what I said yesterday, a major problem that has been occurring is that there has been this process that has been instrumentalizing a sort of bifurcated system of licit and illicit commerce, where certain people are being engineered to understand they have no other option than to engage in illicit currency exchanges and or some sort of economy equivalent to a form of black market economy, where they use cryptocurrencies as the only real legitimate kind of currency they have access to. I'm on the record and agree with movements that were ongoing during the 90s specifically, but for a considerable amount of time, as well as all the way up until the from the late 80s all the way up until now. Identifying video game violence or violent video games as being not only a social hazard, but as being a serious issue. And with the last 10 to 12 years, or actually last 10 to 15 years, of focusing on behavioral economics testing or the use of behavioral sciences when it comes to economic programming or economic engineering, and without giving people basic primary education on how to be safe when it comes to addressing technology, up to and including what has already been noted to be a form of specific mindset around the priority of hierarchical programming when it comes to constructing actual technological regimes. I'm very, very critical of what is being attempted for a supplanting of a traditional economic sector, including one that has a currency that has an actual material basis, and how the refusal in the meantime to rein in derivatives has allowed for a very unsafe situation when it comes to use of any sort of virtual or digital currency regime. I'm specifically concerned with what appears to be a process of normalizing society, at least within the United States, to a licit and concurrent illicit stream that's leveraged against each other. The proliferation of suppression and oppression of people that are dissidents, political repression that sanctions people in manners that are not actually justified, and, by the way, lack certain kinds of security because they are done without due process. And in accordance with being done without due process, they are not provided with a constitutionally backed process of restitution, which also includes severing the previously criminal activities that certain finance streams or security instruments were associated with, and allowing them to be recharacterized so that then they can be allowed to be engaged in illicit economic activity, and or take what was previously illicit or non-legal tender and allow for it to be recharacterized so that it can be used as legal tender. And these have actually been processes that have been intentionally orchestrated. As a matter of fact, there were numerous congressional hearings in the United States. There are a couple of things I think are absolutely relevant and that need to be considered, especially in talking about any sort of digital currency, but also talking about information technologies that allow for multiple processes to run concurrently, including in ways that can be compressed into one sort of data transaction stream that may be potentially disaggregated once it gets to the end user. And this has to do with a series of events that happened in the United States that were originally supposed to be focused on things originating in the United States, including acts of money laundering, and how that may impact certain kinds of economic activities. But during key moments were allowed to instead be almost inverted, or rather CCP'd, right, central counterpartied, into focusing on foreign origin transactions. This has been very, very concerning to me since I found an audit from the Department of State that was from October of 2019 that discussed how through the Department of State, when it came to monitoring transactions in compliance with the Data Act in the United States, the Department of State had been completely negligent for a protracted period of time in terms of identifying the source origin of transactions that were coming into the United States, as well as ones based in the United States and where they were going, while they were also refusing to account for the rates they were paying translators. I think that this may imply that there is some sort of connection or effort to be less than entirely forthcoming, including in forthcoming in manners that are constitutionally compliant, and so far as the elements of the Data Act that the State Department was required to adhere to are constitutional, and in the course of this have allowed for potential to almost provide a form of political risk insurance to some form of forex or foreign currency speculation. I think this might be particularly profound if one is talking about trading in digital currencies, which I understand some have been trying to, at least within the United States, normalize. as if they want to move us toward a transition where the digital economy, digital currencies, or what was previously identified as cryptocurrencies, become legitimized. Now, on one hand, there are possibilities for such things if we allow for a concept of currency being divorced from the kind of power to coin, for instance. But I also contend concurrent to this that what has not been discussed related to the crypto economy and or these digital economies or digital economics is also illegal coinage overall. And this concept of who has the power to coin, and in the course of who has the power to coin, how to make sure that it's done legally so that people who might otherwise be highly productive but may, shall we say, not valorize violence as a form of market speculation or as a means by which to increase the leverageability of market risk for specific political purposes or in accordance with speculation that is intended to be disruptive in sectors that otherwise should be appropriately secured. That in the course of this, what's been happening is there has been a refusal to address acts of illegal coinage because people don't want to talk about the manners in which we biophysiologically engage with the technology to make illegal coinage more capable of occurring and also more profitable for those attempting to get away with it, especially if there's no actual regulation of the digital currency market. And this is another reason why I think that considerations regarding taxation when it comes to digital currencies is very important. My understanding is it's not impossible. It's actually pretty easy to keep track of what would be appropriate for taxation when it comes to the digital economy, but then it would also require acknowledgement and confirmation on origin and destination of the source as well as the recipient of whatever those digital transactional streams are. And that would also include having to be forthright and more forthcoming about whoever is being used in relay or as what they would call a pass-through in any of these kinds of transactions. So these specific areas of noting for these sort of transfers of information, including in connection with the overriding surveillance regimes that have selected certain kinds of transactional streams for priority and have allowed other ones to be maintained and to proliferate without really reining them in, has created this situation of bifurcation. And I believe that really what's happening right now is that there are people that do not, for whatever reason, are not allowed to be identified as having a legitimate political ethos or a legitimate political activity that fits into somebody else's political capital consideration. And so what's going on is there's greater and greater pressure for people that are highly capable and very competent and would otherwise do things, I believe, in not only a legitimate manner, but in a manner that could sustain a great deal of prosperity, are being compelled to a form of gamerization, where it is attempting to normalize them into the sort of glamorization of violence and the valorization of violence, while other avenues are cut off, and that they've been using sanctions, but not just overt sanctions, including sanctions that go through Treasury, or sanctions that go through some sort of employment sector, or shall we say sector, wherein somebody might want to be employed. But they're using sanctions in the form of derivative actions associated with people who are sanctioned. So there's an official realm wherein people are listed as sanctioned, and that they're acknowledged, including through public notices. But then what I'm finding more and more is that, and it's not just within the United States, I believe this is actually something that many countries are involved in, although I only have the evidence for the United States, that what they do is they identify other people that would otherwise be politically viable, and that for whatever reason lack the utility in being overtly criminalized, and they end up sanctioning those people via derivative, and use them in derivative processes in order to not only politically disinvest them, but also politically divest them and divest society from them and their political capital, while it's allowed to be circulated toward other people. And the primary means by which they accomplish this is through engaging them in derivative transactions, including using the digital media and the digital economy under the auspices that somehow they're tracking information connected to people that are officially sanctioned. So these are, a lot of levels, are comprehensive issues. I don't think that these are isolated to the United States. But insofar as there may be, shall we say, there might be a desire for a more comprehensive kind of approach, then this is what I would start with. I think the issues of illegal coinage are some of the most significant, and they need to be addressed as that, but they also need to be addressed as organized criminal activity, and we need to discuss who actually has the power to coin